Hi, my name is David, and today I'm going to show you 3 fun ways that you can repair scratches on the top of your furniture, should you do that, but you shouldn't do that. But if you do, stay tuned. Hi, so welcome to the channel. Once again, my name is David. I'm the president and founder at Clare & Company. I'm a restorer of period antiques and artwork. Been operating inside Washington, D.C. since 1995. If this is your first visit to my channel, welcome. I encourage you to smash that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That way you're going to get updated anytime we post new videos. But you're here now, so while I've got your attention, say you're in the unfortunate situation of where you're dealing with a scratch on your furniture. This could happen for a multitude of reasons. If you're an interior design professional and you're staging a home, if you've just bought a new dining table but you had to move, or I could think of a number of reasons as to why you would have to repair a scratch on a dining table. And most of the ways, truth be told, are probably best left to the professionals like myself. However, there is at least one way which you could probably repair it yourself if you're in a pinch and you're just trying to sort of hide the damage until you can get to a professional. So I'm here today to show you 3 ways that you can repair this furniture should it get scratched. So without further ado, let's walk through the 3 different methods and I'll show you how we can go about repairing some scratches. All right, so essentially, as I promised, there's 3 ways I'm going to show you here we can repair a scratch. And I'll start off with the most involved process that you would have to learn if you're going to go this route. This is the way that I learned this. I learned this technique when I was a young man in my teenage years, my teenage sophical years. And it works really well. Essentially, it's called a burn-in. And when you're doing a burn-in, here is the primary material that you're going to be using. This is a hard lacquer resin. This is manufactured by Mohawk Finishing Products. I'll leave a link in the description below, and you can purchase this through either the manufacturer or through Amazon. You can probably get these in lots of places, but they're not generally found at stores, although if you have a Woodcraft near you, I've seen them at Woodcraft. And essentially, you're going to use some heat, whether you use an alcohol lamp like this, which is basically an old oil can that I've cut the spout off of. I've used a cotton wick here, and I've got denatured alcohol as a fuel inside of it. Or you can use a device like this, which is basically, this is what's called a burn-in oven. This again is sold by Mohawk Finishing. Essentially you plug this in, you put your knives in here and they'll heat up. And the idea is that you're going to heat these knives enough to melt this lacquer. You don't want them too hot, but you'll heat the knives enough to melt the lacquer, and then you, of course, take some of the lacquer and melt it and deposit it down into the scratch and wipe it onto the surface. Once you got it smoothed into the surface, you'll sand any residue off, and then you're ready for your color work. So that's the first fill method. The second fill method that you could use is obviously not something that's as common with antiques, but you do see this a lot in body shops. This is also really common in refinishing shops, cabinet shops, and things of that nature. And this is basically, this one in particular is Bondo. You don't have to use Bondo. There's other body fillers. There's Rage Fill, there's Tiger Fill, there's a bunch of these. Essentially, you can find these at almost any auto parts supplier. Most good paint shops will carry this. You can obviously buy it on Amazon, I'm sure. And essentially the way it works is you have the filler here, and then you have a hardening cream. You'll mix just a dab of the hardening cream into the filler. You have a very small window for work time, and you can just take a palette knife, a small surface to work on, like this little board of masonite here. You mix it up, and of course you just spread it in there. Very similar to doing drywall, mud work. And it works really well. It's quick. It requires a little bit more sanding than this method, but it works very well as well. The only downside to this that I can see, to be honest, is the fact that you're basically stuck with one color. Whereas in these lacquer resins, they come in almost every color of the rainbow. So if you have a green table that's scratched, you can buy green fill sticks. If you have a gold table that's scratched, you can buy gold fill sticks. If it's white, you can buy white, etc. So, and then the third and last method is really more for the average homeowner. And this is something that you should probably keep in your kitchen. If you don't have these at your house, I would recommend going ahead and buying these touch-up kits. You can buy these on Amazon typically. So what I've got here is, this is a fill stick by Mohawk Finishing. Again, you're going to hear that name a lot. They produce most of these furniture touch-up products. They've been around for a long time. I've been in this business 28 years and they've been around that whole time. Or basically a marker, and this is a Mohawk marker. It's an Ultra Mark. So they sell these products. Now these will produce the worst results of the other 2. Of all 3, this is going to be the worst results, but it's the quickest. It's going to get you in a pinch where you need to be. So if you just, say you got a dinner party coming and you scratch your tabletop, you just take a marker and you dab it on there. That's really the best option for the homeowner. So you know, you should probably just keep these around your house. To me, this is like, you should keep it with your cleaning supplies. Just keep them around the house. They're gonna be very handy, and they're gonna be very useful to you. So without further ado, now that we've outlined all three, let's go ahead and scratch this table, and we'll go through each process real quickly. These repairs don't take very long. We'll go ahead and do each one, then we'll discuss it, see what you think, see the pros and cons, and see how it works out. So without further ado, let me get to scratching this tabletop. Break something, cause some damage. Okay, so it should be noted that not all scratches are the same. A scratch that runs with the grain, which is in the same direction as the grain, is much, much simpler to restore than it is a scratch that runs across the grain. Scratches that run across the grain are almost difficult, if not nearly impossible, to hide doing a spot repair without making, of course it's going to depend on the lighting and the color of the wood and things of that nature, because everything really comes into play when you're talking about scratch repairs. But a scratch that goes with the grain is much, much simpler to repair than a scratch that goes across the grain. So keep that in mind when you're looking at damaged furniture and things of that nature. If it's going across the grain, expect that you may very well have to strip and refinish a piece of furniture. So this is a table leaf that I've had here. It belongs to a table that I have in the store, but let's flip it over. I've already started to scratch it here, just so you can see here. I've taken a burning knife and I've scratched this along with the grain. I didn't go too deep, I just exposed some of the wood here. So essentially this scratch is primarily just in the finish. It's really not into the mahogany wood yet. So with that being said, let me go ahead and we're gonna do the first method we're gonna go with is the burn in here. So let me get this fire going and we'll fill this real quickly and you'll see how fast I can go. And also it's worth noting here, anytime you're doing a scratch, you really kind of want to know what the depth of it is. So it helps to rub your finger across it. If you can feel a ridge, you know it's really kind of down into the wood. Sometimes you can scratch a table and it's the finish is separating from the wood, but it's not actually gouged out. You'll see a white line, but a lot of times actually all you're seeing is the separation of finish and wood. So it's not really scratched into the wood, and that requires a different approach because it's really not going to have to be filled. It's going to be just basically touched up. So in any event, let's go ahead and fill this one with the burn-in, and then we'll sand it and move on to the Bondo fill. Okay, so now I've got my knives here and they're pretty hot at this point. The trick with the knives is that you really don't want to let your knives get too hot. And the reason for that is if the knives are too hot, they'll damage the existing finish around it. So it does take a bit of skill to sort of know how to do this. So it's just something you really have to practice with. You know, repetition is the mother of all skills, so you just kind of have to keep doing it over and over until you get the feel for it. It's like any skill, it takes practice to acquire it. In any event, all right, so now that I got these on here and these knives are, you can usually tell by placing your knife onto the lacquer here. If it blisters and starts to boil immediately, you know your knife's just a little bit too hot. So you kind of want to keep a rag around because you're going to be wiping off excess as you go. And you don't need very much of this resin, just a little bit. And I'm going to just place some in here. And once I have a little bit on here, I'm going to just pull it across the surface like this. And again, I'm sort of watching as I'm doing this. Again, if the lacquer resin starts to sort of boil, as it were, your knife's a little too hot. So I know these knives are a little bit warm. But I've got this in here. Now you can see how the lacquer resin is sitting over top of this scratch. And what we want to do is really just make this flush. So you're going to have to use the heat from the knife to get the excess off. And typically I use a little bit of saliva. And you'll hear that sizzle sound, almost like you're cooking eggs. I grew up in the 80s and you used to have this commercial that said, this is your brain on drugs. I think it was a Nancy Reagan commercial. Anytime I hear that sound, that's what I think. All right, so that's pretty much it. I see a little bit of extra down here. And the reason for the saliva, and of course you could use balm or water or anything, is, you know, the saliva prevents the lacquer from sticking to any surface. So if you kind of get the surface a little wet, it'll take off the residue. Instead of smearing it around and kind of making a mess, it'll sort of pull it off. And when I'm looking at this, I'm really trying to watch the light reflection to see what the sheen is on this. Okay. So now that I've got that filled, I blow that out, set this aside. Let's get this out of the way for now. We don't need that anymore now that this is filled. And so you run your finger across this now and it's completely smooth and flat. And so essentially your scratch is fixed, but what we need to do now is sand this smooth and prep it for a little bit of finish work, because of course we have to put a little bit of color on here and a little bit of finish to hide the scratch the rest of the way. So without further ado, let's cut some sandpaper ready, some lubricant for some oil, and we're going to sand this down. Okay, and when it comes to sanding, you really don't have to get very aggressive with this, because the idea is it's going to be pretty much smooth to begin with. So I've just got here some Mirko 400 grit paper, and I'm going to put a sanding block behind it. And the reason you want to use a sanding block is your fingers can be misleading and it doesn't always make something flat. And of course, when you're working with a surface, whether it's a side of a table or a top, you want to always make it flat. So anytime you're sanding, you should always use a sanding block. I'm going to put that over there, and I'm going to use a little bit of orange oil. This is a lubricant, and the reason that you're using orange oil on top of a finished surface is, and this is really key here, you do not want to sand through the existing finish and color. If you do that, you're making a small problem a really big problem. That's probably the number one thing I see mistakes that people make, is that they sand too aggressively. They use way too much force and they'll sand right through the finish and down into the wood. You don't want to do that. So just a little bit of sandpaper, moderate pressure, and that's about it. That's really all you need. And so you can wipe here. You can always check your work. If you see that you need to do a little bit more sanding, because you can see some of the resin is maybe still sitting on the surface a little bit more in one area or something, you can go over it one more time, but always be cautious. And if you see that you get too far and you see that you're going through the finish somewhere, just stop. You don't want to keep sanding. At that point, just stop. So I'll do this one last time here. And again, almost no pressure at all, just very lightly. All right, and then I'm just going to set this aside and clean. All right, and this is perfectly smooth now. So it's always a good idea after you use any kind of oil on a surface, especially if you're going to do finish, you should at that point wipe it off with some alcohol, some denatured alcohol. You don't want to leave residue of oils behind, because it's going to affect the finish. So I'm just going to clean this off really quick. Okay, so there you go. That scratch is really flat, and the only thing left to do now is to do a slight bit of color work and some finish, applying some finish. Other than that, this scratch is completely repaired. Okay, so now that we're going to do a touch-up, we have our scratch filled. All we have to really do at this point is apply a little bit of finish and a little bit of color to really blend this in. Now, it should be noted that I'm working on the bottom side of a table, and this video is not really geared to show you proper finishing techniques. It's really about scratch repair. So I just want to show you that the scratch is technically repaired, and I'm going to show you basically how to do some finish work as well. But again, this is not a class on finishing, so I'm not going to seek perfection in doing the finish here. But, so what I've got here in this jar is some padding lacquer and a diaper. Okay, now these skills stack on top of one another, so what we're going to be doing here is a minor amount of French polishing. So I'm just going to rub this and start to build the finish. Now I'm looking again across the sheen. I can see the area that was sanded and affected because it's duller than the surrounding table. So I'm going to go as far as I can here, end to end, just to get sort of an even finish on the surface. So I'm just looking across this just for it back and forth, and now I'll do a little bit of circling here just to build this finish up. And then once I get a little bit of finish on here, again, not a lot, we're just going to come back and do a really small amount of color application just to blend that in. There you go. Okay, and now we're going to do a little bit of color work. And when it comes to color work, if you've never done this before, the big trick with this is to just use the least amount of powder as possible. The biggest mistake I see that people make is they use too much powders and they get a little too aggressive, very similar to sanding. It's always best with this stuff to try to do the least amount of work as possible. You really don't need a lot. You know what, I don't know, this will be fine, I guess. So really this, when you're looking at the scratch, it's just a little bit lighter than the surrounding area. So really all I want to do is just darken this up a bit. So I'm going to use these powdered pigments just to put a little bit of stain over top of this. I'm not going to get too aggressive with this. And sometimes it's better to do small strokes. You don't necessarily always have to go with a really you know, one stripe across the top. You can just do little tiny brush strokes. And sometimes these color tones are a little tricky to match, so it's okay if you have to play it in layers, especially with mahogany. It's one of the easier colors to do. I'd say probably oak is maybe the easiest wood to touch up on. Mahogany can be a little bit tricky because it has a nice translucent quality and it has a bit of a color pitch to it, in so much as that depending on which angle you're looking at it from, shows a different color. From one angle it's light, and from the other angle it can be dark. And so that comes into play because a lot of the pigment powders don't have that same quality. There is a bit of a trick. You can add iridescent tones to your touch-up if you use a bronzing powder. And that is one trick you can employ if you had to. But again, you know, I'm not trying to go overboard here, just do a small touch-up. But I'll show you, just for the sake of it, what that would look like. And just small strokes. And always when you're doing these brush strokes, you kind of want them to look like the grain. So be very mindful of what the grain pattern around the repair looks like, because it really helps if you sort of try to mimic the look of the grain. Okay, and I'm going to stop right there. I don't think I can make it look much better with this. All right, and once you got that initial bit of touch-up on, you do have to cover this down rather with some more finish, so just give that a second to air dry. I've got more padding lacquer in my hand here, and I'm just going to go over top of this just a couple more passes in order to blend this in a little bit more and bury those pigments down into the finish. And now, of course, there's lots of other ways to continue to chase this. There are small products such as graining pens that you can use if you need to, which are small felt tip markers essentially that you can use to mimic the dark graining pattern that's in this. And you can use those. That would help. And again, here I'm trying to reproduce the look of the grain. And again, be judicious about it. You don't have to go overboard. Sort of look at the surrounding area. So the only thing that would be done now, after you get maybe a small touch up and a quick little bit of graining pen, the next thing you could do is, you see that the area that we worked on obviously is much shinier than the rest of this, because of course this is the bottom of the table leaf. Now you could feather this in with sort of an aerosol, and this is pretty common. Again, these are Mohawk products. This one is just a finisher's choice clear satin, and this is just sort of a generic general finish. You kind of have to know what type of finish you're trying to produce. If it's a satin finish, a lot of times you'd want to rub it out with steel wool. But if it's a small touch-up like this, these come in really handy. And you're just going to go back and forth. Of course, always use proper ventilation. I should probably be wearing a respirator, but for the sake of the video, I'd rather talk to you without a respirator. So that repair essentially is done from start to finish. Repairing a small scratch like that, of course, best case scenario was with the grain. But a scratch like that, you're looking at about a 5 to 10 minute repair. And of course, if this was on a nice dining table top that costs you, say, $4,000 or $5,000 for the dining table, a repair like this can save you thousands of dollars in refinishing costs if you're able to hire somebody to do this repair, or if you know how to do it yourself. So now that that's dry, let's go ahead and scratch the table again, and we'll show you the next process. All right, now moving along to our next repair process. As you can see here was the scratch. Let's see here if I can find it myself. Here was the original scratch that we did with the burn-in fill. As you can see, it's completely hidden, it's nice and smooth. Quick repair process, and as you can also see, I went ahead and scratched the table again here, and just about a 1-inch scratch, maybe 1.5 inch scratch. And this time we're going to go ahead and do the Bondo fill. So let's go ahead and mix up some Bondo real quick, and I'll show you how quickly that process works. I'm personally not a really big fan of using Bondo. I've always thought it was a little bizarre for furniture repair. I learned this method working at a cabinet shop briefly when I was younger. But I don't like this method because it smells really bad. I don't like the smell of it. Also, I don't like the idea of using Bondo on furniture. It just doesn't seem appropriate to me personally. And the trick with this is that you have to just be very quick about it. I've already got almost too much cream in this. Anybody that's used this stuff knows that that's a lot of cream for this amount of fill. But essentially, you just have to make these two parts one color. You do it about as quick as you can possibly do it. You don't want to get a lot of air bubbles, so if you can squeeze it against your surface really well, that's best. And once you got basically one color like that, it doesn't take very long, you just take it and smear it right into the surface here. It's probably a good idea with this to leave it just a little bit on the high side because you have to sand it down. And if you try to take it too closely, it almost shrinks in a little bit and doesn't look great. So I'm gonna just smooth over here. And once you get this in place, you really kind of need to let it dry before you sand it. So I would recommend that once you put this in place, you let it sit 5 to 10 minutes before you sand this. So with that being the case, let's go ahead and fast forward time. Let that harden and dry. Smells awful, jeez. Okay, and while we're letting this body fill dry, we'll go ahead and walk through the easy process of doing a wax and marker repair. So with this one, as I mentioned earlier, it's really going to produce probably the worst results of the three, but it's honestly your best option. If you're just a regular Joe or Jane homeowner and you've got some damage on a piece of furniture. Now, keep in mind, you can get these markers in many different colors as well as these waxes. So if you've got furniture that's fairly expensive around the house and you think it's going to get chipped or damaged, you can go online and you can find these sticks, and they come in, like I said, so many different colors. You can get them in white, pretty much almost every color of the rainbow they'll come in. So, you know, if you have furniture that's getting chipped, if you have kids or something of that nature, something that's getting a lot of use, you know, go ahead and buy one of these. They don't cost very much. It's easy to get them, and they work pretty easily. So let's go ahead and just scratch the table one more time, and I'll walk you through the process of that, just for the sake of it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to tip this up so you guys can see this really good here. And I'll just take the tip of my knife here, and I'm just going to create a scratch here. Again, I'm not going too deep. There's no reason to. I just want to give you the idea. So let's just say you did that and you got a marker here, and this marker, let's see, is Bordeaux. Bordeaux is the color of this marker. I love these color names, but it, you know, generally looks like it's a dark mahogany kind of cherry color. So the idea with this is you're just using the stain. This is probably, yeah, that's a little bit red, but here we are. We're showing you what it looks like. So there you go. That's a dark marker. There's really no magic to this. I'm just going to take and wipe off of it. Now, of course, doing it this way, it's not going to repair the scratch itself. I mean, there's still a divot there, right? But it does at least darken it, so that's good. So, you know, markers are good for that. So there's one way you can do that. Now, the other thing would be if you have, like I said, these wax sticks. These you can sort of ideally make them flat. So let's take this wax stick now, and I'm just going to rub back and forth across this and see if we can get that to deposit itself down into that scratch. And this is where a block's going to come in handy to get the excess off and try to keep it somewhat flat. Now, the downside with the wax, to be honest with you, is that wax stays pliable. It doesn't harden whatsoever. So you can always, this will always be able to be, you can feel it. You're always going to be able to feel it. It'll always be able to be gouged out with a finger or wear or something like that. But anyway, so a good way to get the wax flat, take a block, take a rag, put it on top, and just wipe off the excess. The idea of the block is it's going to keep it fairly flat. So there you go. There's your wax repair right there. It's not terrible. It's not great. It's certainly not as good as a burn-in. But at the end of the day, hey, like I said, if you're in a pinch, those will work okay, won't they? All right, so let's feel this and see how this is doing. That's still a little bit soft. I'm going to give that just another few minutes to dry before we sand that. So we've been through this one and we've been through this one. So if you guys like this type of content, do me a favor, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. It's going to help me out. I'm building a new channel here. I'm having a lot of fun doing so, but I hope you guys enjoy these videos and find some value from them. So make sure you hit that, and also leave me a comment in the comment section. Are you guys cabinet makers? Are you interior designers, or are you just a kid sitting at home on your iPhone playing around late at night? Love to hear where you guys are at in the world, so definitely drop me a comment and let me know where you're at. All right, so let's see if this is dry yet. Not quite yet, 5 more minutes. Okay, and here we are with the last one. I've given it another few minutes to dry, and as you can see here, again, it's a much lighter color than the wood itself. So I'm going to use this is just 400 grit paper on a block again, and I'm going to be really soft with this. I'm not going to be aggressive with it at all. I'm just going to really be, because here's the thing, is this Bondo, it's really easy to peel off. So it doesn't stick to things very well. So that's why you don't want to go too aggressive with your sanding on this. So I'm just starting real light here. I'm going to be really gentle with this until I sort of get the high spots knocked down. And once they do and it starts to fall into place, maybe go a little heavier with this. Okay, and here is the Bondo sanded down, and it's generally pretty smooth to the touch. It's not perfectly smooth. To be honest with you, I can feel it a little bit here. So would probably, in order to get this absolutely perfect, have to do another application, which means more sanding. And also, as you can see here, started to get a little light on the edge of this, so I'm gonna have to stop because, again, I always recommend you don't sand through the finish. And you can see here, just sanding through this Bondo, you do start to sand through the finish a bit, so you gotta be really careful of that. Another reason the Bondo is probably my least favorite approach to making a repair. But now that we got that on there, the rest of the repair is essentially the same as I showed you on the first one with the burn-in fill. Basically now it's just a matter of finish work. So once more, I'll just walk you through this process and we'll wrap this one up. So again, this Bondo, you can go right over top of it. The only downside I find with Bondo is, well, there's a couple of downsides really, but the main downside to me is that the stuff shrinks in a little bit. And when I say that, what I mean by that is it sort of shrinks in over as it dries. As it continues to harden over the next maybe 12, 24 hours, it's gonna shrink inward a bit, and you have to come back and check it and all of that. And I don't necessarily like that about it. The one thing I really like about burn-ins is that they're really fast. Doesn't take very long, basically enough time for your knife to heat up. It's really all it takes. It's the more appropriate fill for fine furniture repairs. And you know, from that regard, it's just a better approach. All right, so now I've got some color on here, and as you can see, it still stands out quite a bit. The color is really obvious. It's a high contrast, not like the burn-in where it was just slightly off, but it doesn't really matter in so much as that the touch-ups aren't really that complicated. So again, I'm just going to do the same process all over again. I'm going to use some padding lacquer here and some blend all pigment stains. And again, you can buy all these products online. This color palette that I work with on a regular basis here is essentially, they come in these, well, I have larger jars, but they come in small jars. You can buy these from Mohawk Finishing. And then the padding lacquer I'm using here is, it's actually a product called Lubricite 77, which is a finish that you can buy. It's a shellac-based lacquer finish. And you can buy that online. So, all right, so with this color here, I'm just gonna try to get this dark tone over top of this. And you know what, let me tip this up so you guys can see this. And I'm just gonna brush some color over top of this. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really nice that the scratch goes with the grain. It makes a huge difference in making a repair like this, because you can do your color lines to mimic the grain. And it makes it a lot easier to do a repair. If that scratch was to go across the grain, it's really difficult to hide it. So essentially that's done. Let me maybe put a couple little highlight streaks in there that are just a tone lighter. And then we'll put some finish on that. And here, again, you don't need to be aggressive with this. You just want to do a little bit. All right, so there you go. And then now that that's done, we'll seal it one more time with some padding lacquer, and then we'll spray over it. And of course, as I said, you can always come back with graining pens and successive layers over top of that to sort of get it as you want it. And I will go ahead and highlight all these repairs here, and you can see that this is certainly something you can do for yourself if you had to, if you scratch your furniture. So hopefully you guys find value in that and it helps you out. All right, I'm gonna go ahead, just for the sake of it, and put a couple grain lines in here. Not too many, just a few. That should be good. And the last thing, if you wanted to do, just to get the sheen to blend in, and again, this is not a master class on finishing, however, I'll probably have one of those up soon too. Don't forget to wear your respirator, kids. Let that dry for a few minutes, then you can come back and check it. Now, and like I said, I'll probably get into a masterclass at some point on finishing and further touch-ups, but this is really just to highlight 3 fun ways that you can fix scratches, so I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Okay, and there you have it. So we have all the 3 different methods for repairing scratches. Up here you have the wax fill, which is right under the line there. Below that we have the Bondo fill, which was right through here. And of course last we have the burn-in fill, which was right there. Which one do you guys think looks the best? Leave me a comment in the comments section and let me know. Most importantly, no tabletops were damaged in the making of this video. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. If you did, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button and catch me on the next one. I'll see you guys next time.